59-year-old Frankie Gebhardt and 58-year-old Bill Moore Sr. have been arrested for the 1983 murder of Timothy Coggins. Officials say a thorough investigation was done at the time of Coggins' death, but because witnesses were hesitant to come forward at that time, the case was left unsolved. The sheriff's office says it wasn't until this year that new leads surfaced. Investigators reopened the case and deputies arrested both Gebhardt and Moore this morning.
The year was 1983, and a group of hunters were exploring the dense wooded area in the small town of Sunnyside, Georgia, when their tranquil day took a horrifying turn. What they stumbled upon was a scene straight out of a nightmare. Lying near a desolate power line, they discovered the lifeless body of an African-American male. The sight was enough to send shivers down their spines. This poor soul had been brutally mutilated. His throat was slashed, and his body was covered with over 30 stab wounds. The man was later identified as 23-year-old Timothy Coggins, and the case was quickly labeled a hate crime. But despite a massive investigation, no one was brought to justice for Timothy's murder. As the years passed, the case grew colder and colder, until a breakthrough in 2017 finally led to the arrests. Welcome back to the chilling realm of the DetectiVerse. Here we cover cold cases frozen in time that were solved decades later. Join us as we peel back the layers, revealing a web of deceit and unspeakable horror that gripped this seemingly peaceful town. We'll explore how this cold case was finally solved and how the alleged killer was finally arrested. Without further ado, let's dive into the case. Meet Timothy Coggins, a young man born in Griffin, Georgia in 1960. From a tender age, Timothy was known for his warm and outgoing personality, a true people's person. Growing up in a close-knit small town, he earned the love and admiration of family and friends alike for his kind-heartedness and willingness to lend a helping hand. With his vibrant spirit, captivating smile, and a zest for life, Timothy easily charmed everyone he met. One person who held a special place in Timothy's heart was his beloved younger sister, Talisa. He not only protected and looked out for her, but also made sure she never missed out on childhood adventures, teaching her to ride a bike and how to confidently navigate their neighborhood. Timothy's affable nature naturally gravitated him towards others, and he cherished spending time with old friends and making new ones. His infectious smile had a way of effortlessly breaking down barriers and instantly bonding him with strangers. But as the early 1980s rolled in, society still clung tightly to its old prejudices, particularly in regards to interracial dating. Sadly, Timothy found himself a victim of this narrow-minded mindset when he chose to be in a relationship with a white woman. This decision enraged a faction of racist individuals within his community, unable to fathom the idea of love transcending color boundaries. In the darkness of an October night in 1983, Timothy was strolling along when he spotted his buddy Jesse Gates behind the wheel of a car. With a wave, Timothy motioned for a ride, and Jesse, a rare black officer in the Spalding Sheriff Department, happily obliged. As the wheels turned and the car sped towards the renowned People's Choice Club, Jesse began to share his concerns with Timothy. In their small town, dating a white woman as a black man was like dancing with fire, dangerously defying societal norms. The warnings hung heavy in the air, their words a somber reminder of the harsh realities surrounding them. As they arrived at the club, located in a predominantly black neighborhood, there was an electrifying energy in the air. The enticing smell of barbecue wafted through the atmosphere, and the vibrant bar promised endless entertainment. However, Jesse couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Outside, 3 white men stood together in an unusual manner, a sight that seemed out of place in this community. Jesse's instincts raised concern, but with Timothy stepping out of the car, he left without suspecting the terrible fate that awaited his friend. Timothy was unaware that his sister Talisa was also present that fateful night, observing from the shadows. Her heart skipped a beat as she caught sight of her beloved brother twirling the white girl across the dance floor. At first, Talisa assumed it was simply a dance lesson, a display of Timothy's magnetic charm. Little did she know, the whispers she overheard would soon shatter their world, like a thundering gunshot. News began to spread through the club that a white man, with uncertain intentions, was on the hunt for Timothy. Fear gripped Talisa's heart as she witnessed her brother following one of the white men outside, completely unaware of the danger that awaited him. It was a crisp autumn day on October 9th, 1983, when a group of hunters stumbled upon a gruesome discovery that would shock the small town of Sunnyside, Georgia, to its core. As they trekked through the wooded area, they spotted the lifeless body of an African-American male lying near a power line. The area was infamous for being a hotbed of drug deals and wild parties, but nothing could have prepared them for what they were about to witness. The man's mutilated body was barely recognizable, a brutalized shell of what was once a human being. Over 30 stab wounds covered his flesh, leaving him looking like a grotesque pincushion. Whoever did this to him had stripped him of his shoes, leaving him only in a pair of blue jeans and a beige sweatshirt, as if the stabbing and dragging weren't enough. They had also carved an X onto his abdomen and back, an emblem of hate and racism. To add to the cruelty, his private area and body had been brutally mutilated, as if his tormentors took pleasure in inflicting the most severe pain and suffering possible. The news of the heinous crime quickly spread throughout the town, and the Griffin Daily News printed a brief article about an unidentified black male found in a grassy ditch. The paper revealed that the young man was in his early 20s and was missing 2 bottom teeth. A tattoo on his left hand was the only identifying mark on his body. Despite the authorities' extensive efforts, the victim's identity remained unknown. It wasn't until the authorities showed up at a local resident's doorstep with graphic photos of the victim that things took a dramatic turn. Talisa, the resident, initially denied recognizing the man in the pictures, but her eyes betrayed her. She knew exactly who he was. It was her brother Timothy Coggins. The tragedy deeply affected the Coggins family. The family struggled to comprehend why someone would want to harm a kind-hearted and easygoing individual like Timothy. Timothy had a habit of disappearing for a few days, so it was not unusual when he went missing a few nights before the incident. People assumed he was staying with a friend, as he was well known in the town. Although the victim was identified as Timothy Coggins, the mystery surrounding the brutal murder baffled the authorities. Initially, the investigation into Tim's murder was superficial, and the Coggins family was given assurances that the case would be solved. However, as time passed, months turned into years, and then into decades, with no resolution in sight. Talisa suspected law enforcement had information about the killer's identity, but chose not to act due to racial bias. The Coggins family was grieving and subjected to a string of frightening incidents, including a blood-stained t-shirt left on their school bus, a brick hurled through their window, and a decapitated dog placed in their driveway. From the start, they knew that Timothy's murder was a hate crime, and they faced constant harassment for speaking out. The authorities' lack of progress left the family hopeless and afraid that justice would never be served. Yet, after more than 3 decades, the family's long wait for closure came to an end. In 2017, their relative's prediction on her deathbed came true. The district attorney's office contacted the family to inform them that the sheriff's department had identified the killer. The investigation was suddenly reopened. Jared Coleman, a studious young investigator, used the sparse notes to identify a suspect briefly considered when Timothy was first found. This time, arrests were made quickly. Upon reviewing the investigative file, what stood out to him was not what was contained in the relatively scant file, but rather what was absent. The police interviews seemed to point to Frankie Gebhardt and Bill Moore Sr., both white brothers-in-law who resided in the trailer park close to where Timothy's body was discovered. Despite interviewing Gebhardt, neither individual had been subjected to intense scrutiny. Gebhardt's alibi was questionable, yet detectives had failed to pursue it. Moreover, it seemed that Moore had not been interviewed at all, according to Coleman. Coleman approached the newly elected local sheriff, Darrell Dix, who had been troubled to discover documents suggesting that at the time of Timothy's murder, several of the department's deputies were active members of the local Ku Klux Klan. The KKK were several historical and current American white supremacists, far-right terrorist organizations, and hate groups. Their primary targets were African Americans, Hispanics, and Jews. This raised questions in his mind about whether the failure to solve Timothy's murder was not just a failure of police work, but deliberate complicity. They revisited the crime scene, an open field between cornfields in the shadow of a towering power line, and compared what they saw to the photos taken at the time of Timothy's murder. Timothy had been stabbed dozens of times and dragged behind a truck along the power line. It was evident that his killing was carried out with personal agenda, since Timothy had been tortured and left to die. Coleman later remarked that the death of Timothy was very clearly a lynching. A lynching is the public killing of an individual often carried out by lawless mobs. The Equal Justice Initiative recently estimated that between the Civil War and World War II, thousands of Black Americans were lynched, with Georgia ranking second only to Mississippi in the number of people killed. Lynching was used as a tool by white Southerners to maintain a societal system of white supremacy through indiscriminate terror. A quarter of Southern lynchings were motivated by a revulsion of sexual contact between Black men and white women. While the lynching spectacles eventually stopped, white vigilante violence never fully disappeared, and the perpetrators of these crimes continued to enjoy their freedom. The message was clear that white men could take the lives of Black men, especially those who pursued white women. As Coleman delved deeper, he saw a familiar pattern. When prosecutors interrogated Frankie Gebhardt in April 2017 about Timothy's death that occurred 34 years ago, he was already in custody at the Spalding County Detention Center for a separate sexual assault charge. Gebhardt denied any involvement in the murder and claimed to have no recollection of it. He also denied ever bragging about committing the crime to anyone. Gebhardt admitted that his heavy drinking over the past 23 years had caused significant gaps in his memory. Gebhardt had a troubled background. Having dropped out of school after 6th grade, he spent most of his life in and around Cary's mobile home park. He earned a living through logging work and through wild parties on weekends, often involving drugs and alcohol. His brother-in-law, Bill Moore, was also known for his violent tendencies, and the duo was notorious in the local courthouse as frequent flyers. During the Timothy murder investigation, investigators uncovered several witnesses who claimed that Gebhardt had boasted about his involvement in the crime. It is alleged that Gebhardt abducted Timothy from a nightclub, took him to the hanging tree, and stabbed him before dragging his body behind a truck. Some reports suggest that Gebhardt was motivated by revenge, as Timothy had cheated him in a drug deal and was having an affair with Gebhardt's old lady, a white woman known as Mickey. Police found 60 knives in Gebhardt's trailer during a search, but Gebhardt boasted to have disposed of any evidence long ago. Arrest warrants were subsequently issued for both Gebhardt and Moore, but their families and friends protested, insisting that the sheriff's office was overeager and that the men were being wrongly accused. After several decades, it seemed that justice was within reach for the murder of Timothy. While investigators had suspected, they still lacked crucial evidence as murder trials loomed. During his first meeting with the prosecutors, Coleman confidently believed they could solve the decades-old cold case. However, the lack of evidence, including soil samples, DNA, and hair samples, posed a challenge. Marie Broder, a prosecutor trained by the tough and experienced Layla Zahn, was frustrated by the lack of evidence in this murder case. Broder knew that they needed the murder weapon to make their case strong. Knowing that the knife was likely at the bottom of Gebhardt's well, they faced the daunting task of excavating it without destroying his trailer. Broder was determined to find a way, and Coleman promised to help. Eventually, they discovered a hydro-vac company in Atlanta that could blast water into the well and vacuum any debris without damaging the trailer. Their efforts paid off when they found a pair of Adidas shoes matching the description of the ones Timothy wore on the night he disappeared. A white t-shirt that showed signs of multiple stab wounds and an old, broken knife. With this new evidence, the prosecutors felt confident they could prepare for trial and secure a conviction for Timothy's murder. This discovery was a crucial turning point in the decades-long investigation, and it helped to build a strong case against Gebhardt and Moore. Gebhardt's defense attorney Lee knew the case was tough to argue. They acknowledged the racist comments, but argued Gebhardt was no less credible than the witnesses, many of whom were felons and drug users. They needed one juror to have reasonable doubt. Broder presented more than a dozen witnesses, including the medical examiner and people who claimed Gebhardt had confessed to the murder. Inmates testified Gebhardt had been excited and boasted about it. The defense called 2 witnesses to show the evidence was weak. Lee gave a fiery closing argument, calling the witnesses trash. But Gebhardt's boasts proved his downfall, and the jury found him guilty on all 5 counts. After being found guilty of the murder of Timothy Coggins, Franklin Gebhardt was sentenced to life in prison by the judge, who declared from the bench, "Hopefully, sir, you have stabbed your last victim." In a plea bargain, Bill Moore agreed to plead guilty to manslaughter and received a 20-year sentence. After the sentencing, Timothy and Moore's families had an emotional encounter. Bill Moore's daughter was visibly upset, and Timothy's family offered their sympathy. The Coggins family's ability to forgive, despite the heinous crime committed against their loved one, is a testament to their cultural upbringing and strength. Timothy Coggins spoke about the legacy of forgiveness within the Black community and how forgiveness is the first thing Black people learn, despite enduring centuries of oppression. The Coggins family's resilience and ability to offer comfort and compassion in the face of such a devastating loss is truly inspiring.